American spirit shines in the wake of tragedy, and in the aftermath of 9/11, one Albuquerque community found comfort and healing in the rubble of Ground Zero. Deacon Robert Vigil of Sacred Heart Catholic Church shares the story.
Here we are at my home parish of Sacred Heart as we prepare for our 10-year memorial for 9/11.
Yes.
And pretty amazing because we preach life and death and resurrection.
Absolutely.
And of course 9/11 is a tragedy that we'll never forget.
Never.
But what it did is we saw the tragedy that took place, which connected our little community of Barelas and brought life to our community.
And how did it connect the community?
Well, you know, our community economically has been kind of on the downfall. You know, we're an older community. A lot of people have moved away.
Right.
A lot of older generations that have lived here for many years.
Right.
Kind of a link to New York City, as if you think of the roots of New York City, we kind of share the same roots. Although we were very fortunate to receive the beams from the World Trade Center.
Yes, and that is so special. And so my question to you, because a lot of people who are from this area know that if they want to see the beams from World Trade Center, they need to come to Sacred Heart. Why was Sacred Heart chosen?
Well, many years ago in the early 60s, we had our original church that was thrown down because the foundation had cracked. So when the church was thrown down, we had two-ton bells that were part of the church that disappeared.
Wow.
40 years later, before 9/11, we get a phone call that a gentleman that owned some property found this big two-ton bell buried on his property, and it said Sagrado Corazon, which means Sacred Heart.
Right.
So he didn't know what to do with this bell. He sold it to their cultural center. They turned around and they said, well, the Hispanic Cultural Center, that is, and they said, well, this bell belongs to Sacred Heart. We need to give it to Sacred Heart. So we had this big two-ton bell in the back of our church and said, what do we do with this? We need to build a chapel. Needless to say, 9/11 took place, a very tragic event. So some of our leaders kind of put their heads together and they said, we should build a chapel to put our bell up. Why don't we write the mayor of New York City and ask for a couple of beams to do this and to tell them our story.
So at the time it was, of course, Giuliani.
Correct. So they wrote these letters. Several of our leaders at that time played a big role in this. So lo and behold, the mayor calls back and says, we'll give you 2 beams, but you have to come pick them up within 3 days.
Whoa. So you had to go all the way to New York to get them?
Yes.
Unbelievable. And then how were they installed here?
Well, we were like scrambling, what do we do now?
Sure.
And so at that time we had leaders in place that said, well, I know this person, I know this person. Our Archbishop played a big role and said, you know, we really want to build this bell tower.
Yeah.
So people just came together. A gentleman donated his rig. He drove cross country.
Oh, wow.
He picked up the beams. They took the Archbishop, well, they took our priest at the time, 2 of our leaders from our community, and another person, I believe, and they went to Ground Zero.
Well, talk about connecting communities, my goodness. Well, now, I have to ask you this. I mean, obviously, there's so much significance to remembering back what we lived through, but now 10 years later, what's the significance of this anniversary to you here?
Well, every time this bell tolls during the day, every hour on the hour, it helps us to remember we will never forget that day.
Yeah.
It helps us to remember an important day in our history, to remember that through that tragedy, there's life.
Sure.
Life in
What a great message.
Small community such as ours.
And is that the message that you sent to your parishioners back then and as well as now?
Same message that we preached back then, same message that we'll preach this weekend.
And before we go, I want to ask you real quickly, what is the reaction from the parishioners when they find out that there's a part of history right here in this church?
They're just filled with excitement. This weekend will be a somber weekend because a lot of people they feel that connection even though they've never been to New York City.
Absolutely.
For somehow or another, they can identify with what took place there because of some of the suffering that has taken place in our own community, which is a miracle.
Well, it's a wonderful thing that you're constantly here to remind us the message we need to remember to get through our daily life on a positive way and commemorate an event that really shook all of us, but can help us to remember to live our lives in a better way from this point forward.
No doubt. That's the message.
Thank you so much, Deacon Robert, so much for being here with us and for sharing this piece of history with this community.
Thank you for coming to our community to visit with us.
Thank you. And for more information on Sunday services, you can call the Sacred Heart Catholic Church. We will have the number on our website at casa.com. Also, some good news, the New Mexico Philharmonic will be performing at Sacred Heart tomorrow night at 7:30. Everyone is invited to attend the concert, which is free.
I remember my grandparents coming in my room crying and telling me that some planes hit the towers in New York. I was pretty upset about that. Got a lot of family that live there. And then next thing I know, I got my brother got deployed to Iraq right after that.